On August 16, 1812, an entire American army surrendered without firing a single defensive shot. Inside Fort Detroit, General William Hull stood behind thick timber walls with roughly 2,500 well-supplied soldiers and 33 heavy cannons. Outside waited a combined British and native force roughly half his size. Yet before a single siege trench was dug or a wall breached, Hull raised a white flag, surrendering his men, his artillery, and the entire Michigan territory. How does a fortified garrison collapse before a battle even begins? Later political accounts blamed Hull's personal fear. British military logs called it a stroke of operational fortune. But the historical record reveals a far more deliberate maneuver, a calculated psychological campaign designed to exploit Hull's deepest anxieties. It was orchestrated in part by a Shawnee leader named Tecumseh. In the summer of 1812, Tecumseh mounted arguably the most ambitious attempt to establish a unified Indigenous Confederacy, one that posed a severe strategic threat to the westward expansion of the young United States. History is never what you think. Fort Detroit did not fall in a single afternoon of clever theater. Its surrender began years earlier, deep inside the oak forests of Indiana, born from a desperate struggle for the land itself. To understand why an American general would hand over a fortress without a fight, one must look at the economic demands placed on the Western territories. Following the Revolutionary War, the United States was deeply in debt, holding vast claims to the continent's interior, but little gold or silver. To pay veterans and fund the government, Washington turned the wilderness into capital, selling native hunting grounds in the Old Northwest to incoming settlers. In the Indiana Territory, Governor William Henry Harrison was the agent tasked with acquiring those tracts of land. Harrison did not rely on open military conquest. He exploited deep fractures between villages and generations. He targeted impoverished chiefs, men dependent on trade goods or annual government payments, and pressed them to cede their lands. In the 1809 Treaty of Fort Wayne alone, Harrison acquired 3 million acres of prime forest for roughly 2 cents an acre. Every month, another treaty erased another stretch of river valley from the map. Council fires split into rival factions. Native communities faced a stark reality: accept territorial fragmentation or find a way to unite before the governor closed the circle. As the treaties eroded their homelands, a profound sense of crisis took hold. Resistance required more than anger. It demanded a spiritual awakening. In 1805, Tecumseh's younger brother, Lalawethika, experienced a series of intense trances. He emerged, took the name Tenskwatawa, the open door, and sparked a sweeping religious revival. Tenskwatawa called for total cultural renewal. He urged his followers to cast off European clothing, throw away iron kettles, and pour trade alcohol into the dirt, identifying the drink as a poison brought to weaken native resolve. Followers gathered by the thousands at a newly established capital, Prophetstown, built precisely where the Wabash and Tippecanoe rivers meet. While Tenskwatawa stirred the spirit, Tecumseh built the political framework. Tecumseh was a highly effective diplomat and a deeply respected strategist. Riding from the Great Lakes down to the Gulf Coast, he brought a single, uncompromising message to every council fire: the land belongs to all indigenous peoples in common. No single chief had the right to sell what belonged to everyone. Under Tecumseh's doctrine, every treaty signed with Harrison was legally void. Tecumseh was attempting something rarely seen on the continent: unifying the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, Wyandot, Kickapoo, and the Southern Creek into a single defensive front. If he succeeded, American officials feared the United States would hit an unyielding barrier at the Ohio River. Every mile Tecumseh rode, brought the region closer to an explosion. Governor Harrison watched Prophetstown grow, realizing that a unified native front could effectively paralyze Western settlement. In the autumn of 1811, Harrison saw his opening. Tecumseh rode south to recruit among the Creek Nation, leaving strict instructions for his brother to avoid any clash with American troops until the Confederacy was complete. Harrison did not wait. He marched a column of 1,000 regulars and militia directly toward Prophetstown, pitching camp less than a mile from the village gates. The proximity of Harrison's forces created an intolerable tension. On the fog-shrouded morning of November 7, 1811, conflict erupted along the Tippecanoe River. Accounts from the time indicate that Tenskwatawa assured the warriors that spiritual power would protect them from enemy lead. Under cover of darkness, native forces struck Harrison's line. The Battle of Tippecanoe was a bloody, chaotic clash in the brush. The warriors inflicted heavy casualties, but as dawn broke, the disciplined volleys and superior numbers of the American infantry forced a tactical withdrawal. Harrison's troops entered Prophetstown, burned the longhouses, and destroyed the winter food stores. Harrison claimed a decisive victory, using it to launch his national political career. But while Tenskwatawa's religious authority was severely damaged, Tecumseh's political vision survived. Returning to find his capital in ashes, Tecumseh realized he could not defend the region alone. Facing a rapidly expanding American military, he needed an ally with regular infantry and artillery. He turned his eyes north, toward British Canada, setting in motion the exact chain of events that would end at the gates of Fort Detroit. When the United States declared war on Great Britain in June 1812 and invaded Canada, British forces faced grim odds. Major General Sir Isaac Brock, military commander of Upper Canada, was vastly outnumbered. He understood that his small force of regulars could not defend the province alone, and that native mobility, numbers, and knowledge of the terrain would be decisive. Brock was a rare commander for his era. He respected Tecumseh, trusted his military instincts, and treated him as an equal partner in command. When the two men met at Amherstburg, their objective was immediate and singular: Fort Detroit. Inside the fort, General William Hull held 2,500 troops and heavy artillery. Outside, Brock and Tecumseh commanded a force roughly half that size. Brock lacked the numbers for a protracted siege. Tecumseh lacked heavy siege guns. What they shared was a complete understanding of Hull's fears. They launched a coordinated campaign of deception. British officers permitted dispatches to be intercepted, exaggerating the number of Northern warriors arriving daily. Brock then sent a formal demand for surrender, containing a chillingly calculated warning: "It is far from my inclination to join in a war of extermination, but you must be aware that the numerous body of Indians who have attached themselves to my troops will be beyond my control the moment the contest commences." Then came the visual theater. Contemporary accounts and later recollections described Tecumseh marching his warriors past a gap in the tree line in full view of the fort, cycling them back through the dense brush, and marching them past again to inflate their perceived numbers. Inside the fort, Hull watched through his glass as what appeared to be an endless tide of warriors surrounded his position. Paralyzed by the fear of an unbridled assault on his garrison and the civilians sheltered inside, Hull's willingness to fight dissolved. Without a single breach made in the walls, General Hull raised a white flag and surrendered Fort Detroit. Tecumseh's strategy had worked. The Indigenous front Harrison tried to crush at Tippecanoe had just captured the centerpiece of the Northwest. The bloodless capture of Detroit shifted the momentum of the war. Thousands of warriors flocked to Tecumseh's banner, and for over a year, the British Native Partnership successfully held the Western Theater. But this success relied heavily on a fragile command structure. In October 1812, General Brock was killed in action at the Battle of Queenston Heights. His successor, Major General Henry Proctor, was a cautious commander who lacked Brock's daring and held little confidence in his native allies. Trust began to unravel. The crisis came in September 1813, when American forces won the Battle of Lake Erie. Without control of the water, British forces could no longer receive rations or ammunition, effectively cutting off the supply lines to Detroit. Panicked, General Proctor ordered a rapid retreat eastward into Ontario, abandoning Fort Detroit and burning his own supply depots. Tecumseh was furious. He confronted Proctor directly, arguing that retreating abandoned the very lands they had sworn to defend. He famously compared the fleeing general to a frightened animal running from a fight, its tail tucked between its legs. Tecumseh knew that a prolonged retreat would cause his multi-tribal force to scatter. He forced Proctor to turn and make a stand along the Thames River near present-day Chatham, Ontario. On October 5, 1813, the Battle of the Thames began in a swampy oak forest. The British defensive line was poorly prepared. Proctor deployed his exhausted regulars in a thin line across open timber, their artillery rendered useless without proper ammunition. Positioned in the dense swamp to their right were Tecumseh and his warriors, anchoring the flank in the heavy brush. William Henry Harrison, now commanding the American Army of the Northwest, launched a rapid assault using mounted Kentucky volunteers. The demoralized British line shattered within minutes, and General Proctor fled the field. Tecumseh and his warriors stood alone, mounting a stubborn defense in the swamp. Eyewitnesses described intense hand-to-hand fighting through the thick powder smoke. During the engagement, Tecumseh was killed. The exact circumstances of his death remain disputed. Kentucky Colonel Richard Mentor Johnson later claimed to have fired the fatal shot, a claim he leveraged to become Vice President of the United States. Primary accounts conflict, however, and Tecumseh's body was never officially identified by American forces. Following his death, surviving warriors withdrew into the swamp, carrying his body with them. His burial site was kept secret, hidden so effectively that its location remains unknown today. The death of Tecumseh marked the collapse of one of the most formidable indigenous coalitions in North American history. Without his leadership, the Confederacy fractured into isolated factions, and individual tribes were forced to sign away their remaining lands piece by piece. Over the next 2 decades, as American settlements swept across the continent, the Shawnee, Potawatomi, Wyandot, and Ojibwe were systematically dispossessed and driven west of the Mississippi River. Yet Tecumseh's campaign was not merely a tragic prelude to removal. It was a moment when the geopolitical map of North America almost changed forever. He came within a single military partnership of establishing an independent indigenous nation in the center of the continent. As the autumn rain washed the smoke from the swamp along the Thames River, the British regulars retreated, the American army claimed the West, and the warriors melted back into the deep woods, taking the body of Tecumseh with them. They buried him in the dark soil of the region he had fought to save, leaving behind no marker, no monument, and a lingering question of what North America might look like today had he lived.